'Tis I, Vicky. We're here today because I made a vintage inspired skirt. To be a little bit more specific, I made a vintage inspired skirt with no pattern and these bare hands. Now let me just say it straight out the door. It is very intimidating for me to share this video of my process of how I made this because there are a lot of sewing experts out there in the vintage community, and not just vintage sewing people, but just general sewing people out on YouTube and the internet world. And I am none of that. So it's really, really scary to put yourself out there and do something the way I'm doing it in an unconventional way. And being that this is the first thing that I've ever made in my life, but I thought I'd just do it anyways and just share the process with you guys, especially because if you're a gal like me who is absolutely new to sewing and you're a novice seamstress, I don't even know if I would call myself a seamstress, novice sewer, sewing person, sewer. Hopefully this gives you some courage and it shows you a thing or two and just inspires you to make something all together. And if you don't have a sewing, Aussie, seriously, you need to stop walking around. You wanna sit on my lap? Okay. Just ignore Einstein over here, his little Einstein head. Oh yeah, also, this video is part of the Stripey challenge. So this is actually the reason that I've decided to just take the plunge and make something. If you're not familiar, which, I mean, who isn't really? Carolina Zabrowska. Hold on. Carolina Zabrowska, who according to her Instagram bio, is a vintage style and fashion history geek, appreciator of all things in general, and also does YouTube. She's really great. You guys should check her out if you haven't. Is putting on the Stripey challenge. When I first saw this on her Instagram that she posted that she was doing the Stripey challenge, I felt like this was bam, instantly my call from high above to finally take the plunge and stop being a procrastinator and do it. So she put on this challenge where you could pick a historical garment, has to be pre-1970s, featuring black and white stripes. I decided to just plunge right into it. I saw this post. I thought it was a super cool, just fun thing to participate in and finally make something. So being that I don't have a sewing machine and I knew that I didn't want to work with a pattern, I picked a 1950s pleated skirt to give you a little bit of history on the pleated skirt because Carolina did say to pick a historical garment. Oh God, these are dirty as heck. According to vintagedancer.com, pleated skirts were very popular in the 1950s, especially with Dior. They could be large pleats or tiny accordion ones as long as there was plenty of fabric. So there's your history. So without further ado and no more rambling, I'm gonna get right into it and show you guys how I made my pleated skirt. So to make my skirt, I used 4 yards of striped fabric, which was a bit more than I probably needed. Maybe I only needed 3, I think. I also used some thread, of course, an invisible zipper, some tape measure, a stick ruler, needles, pins, hooks and eyes, a pair of scissors, and chalk. And minus the scissors and ruler, which I already had, I only spent $20 on everything else in the downtown LA fashion district. Moving on to measurements. First, I measured my waist and added 2 inches. So my waist was 30 plus 2, that equals 32. And then I measured the length and added 1.5 inches for seam allowance. So I went with a total of 25.5 inches and I measured that from my waist down. You might need help during this part. I did not picture that here. So after that, you can technically get to cutting and prepping your garment for sewing, but I had a problem because the stripes are going the wrong way. The wrong way. You see, mine were going horizontally with the fabric, but I wanted them to go down vertically. So essentially I had to cut down the middle of the fabric and then I had to sew the 2 pieces so the lines were going down vertical in one long piece and not horizontally. I did not measure this, but this piece ended up being about 3 yards long, which was enough. And then I just ended up cutting the length as well that I needed, so 25.5 inches. So that's the thing about stripes. Unlike a solid or mixed pattern, you really have to be careful about the direction of your material and things aligning or else it will look wonky. I knew there was more to Carolina's Stripey challenge. All right, so now we're ready to party. So after that little hiccup, I was ready to do my pleats because this is a pleated skirt, of course. For my pleats, I went with 3 inches width for each pleat, just my preference. You can go smaller or thicker than that. So I started off by measuring and marking up 3-inch spaces, and then I folded or connected each line in order to form a pleat. pinning each corner into place. Thankfully, each one of these lines was an inch thick, so that really helped. I really hope that this makes sense. Just see what I'm doing here. Hopefully these visuals help you guys. Also note that I started my pleats at the middle of my garment where I sewed the two pieces together to make one long piece, and then I moved down outwards through each side. So I did 15 inches worth of pleats on each side plus an additional extra inch, so 16 inches on each side for a total of 32 inches. And the reason I did this is because I wanted to make sure that the seam lines were equal on each side, so one seam line on each side of my hip and not like one at the front and another one on the side or something like that. After that was done, I ironed the pleats down to make sure everything was aligned, and then I sewed them, and this took forever. I went over them many times to make sure that they would not come undone. If you have a sewing machine, please use it. But you don't have to, of course, if you're like me and you're trying to be stubborn and say you can just do it all by yourself without a sewing machine. I mean, you're just gonna need time for this part. Just lots of time. Just a few extra hours every here and then. And then finally, before cutting it out, I measured things one more time to make sure that I cut 32 inches worth of fabric. Next, I was ready to make my waistband. For my waistband, I cut a piece of fabric that was the length of my waist plus 2 inches, so 32 inches long, and I made it 7 inches wide. This was to allow for a fold on each side of 1 inch, so that would then leave it at 5 inches, and then fold it in half, it would make it a 2.5 inch waistband. I then folded and ironed it in half, and then folded the edges in 1 inch on each side and ironed in those as well. And then I closed it again and ironed it down to form a waistband. Next, I pinned those 1 inch edges to each side of my skirt to kind of sandwich it in between the waistband. After that, I sewed it into place as carefully and as neatly as I could to make sure it stayed into place and it was nice and sturdy, but I also didn't want to overdo it and make a big old mess. Also, this took forever. Honestly, sewing machines were invented for a reason. I know that, I know, and I will get one eventually. That is obviously the biggest lesson here, but like I said, I wanted to do this without investing too much money to first prove to myself that I could go through the process. After an eternity of sewing that waistband in, I sewed in the hem. So I folded and ironed in 1 inch and pinned that into place to make sure things were neat and didn't move. And then I just did some small stitches. Well, what looked like small stitches on the outside at least. After the hem, it was zipper time. For the zipper, I took those open ends of my skirt and folded them in 1 inch. One side I accidentally cut off 1/2 inch from the waistband. Oops, honestly, I don't know what happened or what I was thinking. I'm dumb. And I was really tired. But anyways, it still works, so thank goodness. Then I ironed in each side that I folded in. I pinned those ends into place all the way down. And then I took my invisible zipper and pinned each side of that invisible zipper, making sure that the top end of the zipper was aligned with the waistband, so no crooked zippers here for the most part. And I did this with the skirt inside out, making sure that the zipper was facing the correct direction and didn't end up being like on the inside. I did my best to make sure that when I closed it from the outside, it looked like a hidden zipper. I tried really hard, friends. I am so proud because I know that zippers can be very scary and a nightmare. And then after all of this pinning was done, I sewed it into place. For the sewing in of the zipper, note that I alternated here between white and black thread because I didn't want the thread to be as visible on the outside since one end was black and the other was white. For being the first zipper I have installed ever and by hand, I'm proud. I'm very proud. It doesn't look like it was made by a 5-year-old. It looks like it was made by a 7-year-old. After the zipper, it was time for hooks and eyes, and not for me and my injured hands and eyes after making this skirt, but for the skirt. I stitched in the hooks and eyes to each side at the very top of the zipper near the corner of the edges. Finally, I closed the rest of the skirt from the bottom of the zipper down, and that was it. I was done. I couldn't believe it.
Please don't talk about
this is the final product. I'm really, really proud. My fingers are very, very sore and my eyes hurt. I was blind for about a day after I finally finished. But you know what? I did it. It's mine. It's my skirt. I made it. It's hashtag me made. Probably gonna have it for the rest of my life and I'm very, very proud. It's my first little baby that I've fully made all by myself, aside from like dog costumes that I've made with glue guns and very, very minimal stitching. Not the greatest, but not the most horrible. Should be the slogan of this channel. I mean, considering the circumstances, being that it's the first thing that I've ever made and I had no sewing machine or no pattern, I would say it's perfection for my standards. Mainly what I wanted to prove to myself was that I could first off make something, and that's why, like I said, I didn't want to invest in a sewing machine until I knew that I liked the process and that this would be something fun for me, which it is. I like it and I know I can do it, and I'm really excited to see what I can do with a sewing machine. Obviously, this could have been way, way more neater. Stripes could be a little bit of a challenge. Your stripes are not exactly matching up. It could look like a total mess. So I'm glad that I went with something really simple and just like totally calculated and just simple. I am gonna get my sewing machine sometime this autumn when I find one that I like, and probably just redo the hems because I didn't totally love the way that the hems turned out. I want that more neater stitch as well as the top part where the waistband is at. I did my best. I did the neatest that I could with my hands. There was probably a way that I could have done it better, some type of hidden stitching, which I'm sure exists, but I just didn't think of looking or practicing it. But I think I'll go back and just redo that so that it could be super sturdy and it could last me forever. I mean, I don't think this is gonna fall apart, hopefully, fingers crossed, anytime soon. I was really, really intimidated to put this video out there, just showing you guys my process of how I made my first item ever. But again, I wanted to hopefully serve as an inspiration for any gal out there that is doubting herself, but really deep down inside wants to make something. So hopefully you learn and you do what I did, and maybe you can do it even better than me. Thank you, Carolina, for putting on the challenge and for finally encouraging me to go out and make something, even if it's the most simple thing in the world. I don't even know if I followed this challenge right. I mean, I did pick a popular historical garment from the 1950s. It was worn all the time and it was an everyday thing. And I mean, stripes did exist in the 1950s, so there you go. As always, my friends, sending you all a super duper big virtual hug wherever it is that you are in the world, and I'll see you next time. Bye. Did I really just film this entire thing with a stain on my shirt and a bunch of dog hairs everywhere?